But the point is that most Negroes, most black people do not trust white people, and most Negroes hate white people. And as long as this country, as the white people in this country, use all the fantastic evasions which they do use to protect themselves against this knowledge, there's one thing every white man in this country knows. He knows he wouldn't like to be black here, no matter what else he doesn't know. No. And all the liberal movements that I've ever been associated with, and all the liberals, almost all the liberals, and the exceptions only prove the rule, all the liberals that I've ever known are working day and night, and not only in terms of not letting a Negro live next door to them, but in terms of their own minds, their own consciences, their own way of life, but to protect themselves against the crime for which they know they are responsible. Now, I cannot, and this is what is important about this, I think, and the future of the country depends on it. If I, as a black man, must be responsible every day of my life for something I did not do either, if I must pay for the history written in the color of my skin, so must white people. The great pain about being a Negro here is that you can never get across to a white person the fact that you are as human as he is, and that he is losing his humanity insofar as he denies you yours. This is the great advantage of the Muslim movement. It doesn't matter whether they hate you or not. But one's got to deal with the record.
Well, I marvel sometimes that if, as is said by the Muslim speakers, that the white man has hated the Negro since he has been on earth, why has the white man done so much to help the Negro? For example, I noticed they abolished the slave trade in Africa and from here to Africa, and I don't know when any of the Muslim states have done that. They've set up schools and clinics and hospitals and asylums and all in colleges throughout all black Africa. I don't know that anybody can point out one Muslim college or university south of Egypt and Morocco in Africa for the education of black people. Now, these things have been done, and it doesn't seem to me that this is the action of people that hate a whole people. Of course, there are white people who hate Negroes, but I don't see any reason or justification for exaggerating the situation.
May I, Mr. Baldwin, pardon me, may I come back just for purposes of clarification to try to get Mr. X's comment on the statements. First, that his movement stands for black supremacy. Secondly, that it intends to bring it about by the use of force.
If by supremacy you mean rule, the fact that the white man has been ruling for so long, which is white supremacy, and most of your white historians and even your current politicians and diplomats admit that the trouble that the white world is in today is losing out all over the world. Britain used to rule an empire so large she bragged about the sun would never set on it. But today, when the sun rises, you can't hardly find Britain.
Mr. X, we're talking about what you want to happen. And your leader is quoted in Mr. Lincoln's book as saying that he wants to use an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and he wants to end white rule in the U.S. He wants to overthrow it, to use the quotation.
If Mr. Lincoln said that, Mr. Lincoln is 1,000% wrong.
What does he mean by the quotation, then? We must take things into our own hands. What does it matter if 10 million of us die? There will be 7 million of us left.
If you have men, if you have crimes, such as those that were committed against Emmett Till, and the government itself could go into Mississippi and find the exact culprits who committed the crime, or the type of crime that was committed against Mac Parker, and again the government agents go in there and find the culprits who were guilty of murdering Mac Parker, and then turn around and the government admit that it is not able to bring those murderers to justice, I think that it would be insane on the part of any man to deny the family of Mac Parker or the family of Emmett Till the right to come together and defend themselves, since the government admits that it can't. It is helpless to defend them.
I take that to be your justification of the use of violence by Negroes.
If America is justified in retaliating against Japan when Japan strikes her, or retaliating against Germany when Germany strikes her, or retaliating against any other country to defend herself from attack, I think that America has reached the point of insanity to think that the world would look upon the black people here in America as being wrong if they took a stand to defend themselves against the crime that the white man is committing against us here day and night.
I don't see why you don't answer the man's question. Are you for force or are you against force? If you're for force and the use of force, then that's sedition. Why don't you level on the thing instead of curving all
Is
around?
it? Wait a moment. No. I didn't come. You can't put words in my mouth.
Pardon me,
I know it all the time.
But I want to get that point right there straight.
Yeah,
Since it is Islam and the Muslims who are being discussed here, and it is Islam and the Muslims who are under fire, I think that it is only right to expect me to give you my answer, not someone else's answer, because this is what primarily has been done here in America. Everyone else speaks for the Muslims, and they're not allowed to speak for themselves. Now, you don't put a yes or no answer today in the mouth of any black man, other perhaps than Mr. Schuyler.
Nobody speaking. That's the same.
You're correct.
Pardon me, Mr. Lincoln, would you like to comment on this or any related point as to what the real program is? Is it a program of force or not?
From what I have been able to determine, the Muslims are very careful not to talk about the use of force. Now, in the early days of my research on the movement, it was stated among Muslims that they looked forward to a sort of day of Armageddon that was to take place around 1970, when the white man in America would be overthrown, and when the black man would come into what was considered to be...
I challenge that, and I think you're 1,000% wrong.
Pardon me, Mr. X, let him finish, said you didn't comment on it,
But, at the same time, Mr. X, it is true that the Muslims have avoided, as I said, any direct reference to the use of force, and in more recent times, the Muslims have tended to say that Allah himself, am I correct?
No, you're wrong in the first part, and you're right in the last part. We have the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has never taught us that we ourselves are going to fight the white man. But he has taught us that there will come a day when God will destroy evil from the face of this earth. God will do it. He has never... Proof of the matter is we never carry arms. We're probably the only black group in America, as large as we are, who can absolutely say at a meeting that we have that not one man in that audience has arms in his pocket or alcohol in his head. And I think that it's absurd to stand around and accuse the black Muslims of advocating violence when we've never been during the entire 30 years that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has been teaching here in America, we have never been involved in any aggressive acts against any white people, and any time the violence has occurred, and even the newspapers have to admit this, and the police, whenever we've been involved in any violence, it has always been at a time when we ourselves were attacked, because we 1,000% don't believe that a man should turn the other cheek when there is knots on his cheek already, and the man is going to put some more knots on his cheek. We can't see that.
Gentlemen, before the time runs, yes, go ahead.
May I respond to Mr. X's statement? You talk about putting words in people's mouths. Now, I have pointed out very clearly in my book that the Muslims do not initiate aggression. I have pointed out very clearly that they do not carry arms. I have pointed out clearly that they are taught not to initiate aggression, and that they must not even have so much as a fingernail file in their pockets.
Correct. And always obey the law.
Always obey the law. As a matter
Mr.
of fact,
Lincoln, you're confusing me. It's you who wrote the description of the fruit of Islam, the secret army, and said they received training in judo, military, and then military drill and the use of knives and blackjacks. The fruit of Islam looks forward to playing a heroic role in the impending battle of Armageddon. Mr. Lincoln, page 201.
Let me finish. I said that they do not commit aggression. So far, what they're going to do in the future, nobody knows. It's up to Muslims themselves.
Where does the blackjacks and the knives come in with Muslims?
Well,
They search for them.
I beg your pardon, Mr. Scott?
They search for them.
Everyone who comes into the mosque that are set up here in America under the spiritual guidance of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is checked thoroughly, because we're absolutely against any kind of aggression or weapons that one can use in aggression.
Well, if there's such peace lovers, then why do you have to search them? That's the question that comes to my mind.
Mr. Schuyler, the thing that I can't understand on this violence and hate business, the Rockwell, this so-called Nazi who wanted to give a speech down in the village, was stoned by the Jews, and the Jews were never accused of violence or hate. He was stoned in Boston by the Jews, and the Jews never were accused of violence and hate. The man hadn't done anything, but he wanted to make a speech. Yet any time a Muslim or a black man, he doesn't have to be a Muslim, stands up here in America and mentions that it's time for him to try and defend himself, not from someone's doctrine, but from the actual violence that is committed against him, then that black man is accused of being violent. And just because we remind the public of the crimes that were committed against our people here in America during slavery, we're accused of advocating a hate campaign. But right now you turn on your television, your radio, and all of your press, and you'll see nothing on there about Eichmann and what the Germans did to the Jews 1,000 years ago. And yet the Jews aren't accused of carrying on a hate campaign.
They actually talk at great length and monopolize a considerable amount of time. However, I would like to say that one of the things that was in Mr. Lincoln's book that intrigued me was the fact that this Muslim movement is run as a kind of a dictatorship itself. There haven't been any elections. People are tried without having anything to say about it and cast into the outer limbo. The women are subordinated and have no voice within the movement. Now, that doesn't seem to me like something new in the world. It seemed to me to be pretty reactionary.
You wrote in the Pittsburgh Courier, Mr. Schuyler, about the Muslim movement yourself on May the 30th, 1959, at which time you said, from what I have seen and heard about the program of the black Muslims in this country in the past few years, I conclude that there is much to commend it to other sects and religious groups, many of whom seem to be distressingly unwitting in their way.
I just said that.
You also pointed out that not only do the Muslims believe in it, meaning this economic progress, but they are doing it. They are not only preparing and serving their food, but they are growing it. This is what you wrote. You also said, we are alone in not doing this in regard to setting up economic enterprises for ourselves, so we are always rattling the tin cup and begging for succor.
Now, you see, that's what you get for trying to be nice. Now, I just told Mr. X here a little while ago that this was a part of the Muslim movement which I commended very highly. You don't have to go back to what I wrote a year or so ago. I said that this afternoon, and I say it again. But you haven't dealt with the issue that I raised about the Muslim movement being dictatorial itself.
Sir, it's because we have unity.
Are you or aren't you?
No, sir. It's because we have complete unity, and again, the worst critics of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad give him credit for establishing better discipline and unity among his followers than has ever been established among any so-called Negroes in America. And anytime there is unity in any country that that has a philosophy or a doctrine or an aim that's in opposition to the power existing bloc.
Mr. Schuyler wants to come in, and we have to move on to another point. Mr. Schuyler, do you want to drop this point now? I don't think you men are going to agree.
Well, of course, we'll never agree, and I won't drop it, but I will not want to monopolize the time.
Mr. Schuyler has made an issue about our religion, and about the Muslims being the one who create all this. He made the point, and I think I want to clear it up. He has made an issue about our religion.
Pardon me,
saying that
X, I must call you to order here. Mr. Schuyler has dropped the point so that we can move to something else. I want to bring Mr. Baldwin in here, if I may, because I've been very much interested in your articles in Harper's and the Times and so forth, in which you explain the whole Negro mood, part of which is expressed through the black Muslims, as in part of reaction to world events, particularly Africa. And this is a new Negro, you say. Now, in these terms, it's quite interesting to me to read of the alleged connections between the black Muslims and the Muslims in Africa, and between the black Muslims and the Castro movement in Cuba. Do you know anything about this?
No, I don't know anything about that in detail, but I know nothing about the Muslim movement in Africa at all, so I can't talk about that.
Well, of course, it is making great progress in Africa, as you know.
I know that.
Do you see this as a worldwide movement at all, which would appeal to the Negro?
Well, how can I put it? You know, it seems to me to be arguing in a way almost after the fact. If we're talking about power, it is very, very clear that the Western nations, the white nations, that power is broken. The connection between Cuba and American Negroes I can see very well, because the way that the United States role in Cuba are exactly analogous in the mind of any Negro living in this country to the situation he finds himself in here. Now, again, I have to come back to this point. We are really talking about power, and we cannot argue with the Muslim movement in those terms, because, I repeat this, they're only imitating. They're simply doing the same thing that the white world has done for all these years. Now, that happens to be my objection to the Muslim movement. It seems to me that what we in this country do not know and have not faced is that we can very well isolate ourselves on this continent because the world is no longer white at all. We do not know what to do this in the first place. When we're talking about, I think that Malcolm, Mr. X, and I don't entirely agree with Mr. Schuyler either, or white Americans. I don't know what white men have in the first place, which is so desirable. I don't know why it's so important to be white anymore. It seems to me the civilization, which we are now witnessing in a way, if not the end of, the great transformation of, can only be saved by us in this country if we're willing to do something which we have not done.
What would we do, Mr. Baldwin, in your opinion? Do you favor the black Muslim program, or do you favor the program of, let us say, the NAACP?
Well,
I'm trying to get this.
I think the NAACP program is probably outmoded because when you have a situation where the legality of a country is in question, then one does not know what is legal anymore. One has got to revise the entire system.
Well, the NAACP says what is legal is the integration of American life.
What is legal then in Mississippi?
The integration of American life.
How does one achieve it then in Mississippi?
The NAACP says you keep trying until you achieve it.
And Mr. X responds that
he says he's impatient.
Mr. X responds and says he will not wait 100 years.
No, he says something else. He says he doesn't want it either.
I say, wait a moment. No, don't say what I say. I say that the black masses themselves in America are impatient, and that the white man does not know how the black masses think any more than he knew how the peasants in Cuba thought when he went in there and thought that they would rise up and side with him.
Now, you said the white man does not know, and I'm sure I don't know.
He doesn't know, sir. He doesn't know because he's not being told by his so-called Negro advisors, or the ones that he has set up as spokesmen for the so-called Negro.
Well, these so-called advisors, I thought were men of some knowledge about the Negro community.
They never live in the Negro community.
Ralph Bunche has denounced you as a totally escapist movement. Roy Wilkins, Executive Secretary of the NAACP, says you are preaching pure hatred. Thurgood Marshall called you such violent names I won't repeat them here.
Answer to each one of those?
Martin Luther King says you are simply one of the hate groups arising in our midst.
I think all of that.
Wait a moment, sir. I think that in fairness, since these things that you read to your audience, in order for you to be fair, I have to make my comment.
Go ahead.
Number one, these so-called Negro leaders that made these statements, it's contrary to our policy ever to attack anyone personally, only in defense. And I think that each one that you read off, you couldn't find them in Harlem. The only time you ever see any one of those that are made spokesmen by you, parrots, by the white man, you never find them in Harlem. You find them at the Waldorf Astoria. And as far as them knowing how the black man out there in the street thinks, all you have to do is do like John Griffin, this white man who posed as a Negro did for 6 weeks. He was a pseudo-Negro, and yet he comes back today and he's an expert on how a Negro is supposed to feel. And we've been black all of our lives, and when we step up and try and tell you how a black man who is born black feels, you think that we're haters or racist or something of that sort. And I think that it's bringing injustice to the public.
Yes, I'm from Harlem, too. I was born in those streets and raised in them, and I think I know something about it, too. All of the condemnations from Mr. Bunche, et cetera, are all far too simple. The challenge that this movement represents, and I think it's very misleading to think about it simply as a movement. The challenge this movement represents has nothing to do with what they call themselves, or even what their aims are. Whether Mr. X is willing to say what their aims are, or whether or not we know. The challenge this movement represents is finally whether or not this country means to be what it says it is. Are we free or are we not? And we can only decide this one way. If the country wants to be free, then it has got to do something to prove it. And as long as we're not willing to do it, then the Muslim movement will gain more and more and more ground, and not only here but all over the world. If it means we say, I think we should put the governor of Mississippi in jail, as opposed to putting harmless people who challenge House Un-American Activities Committee in jail. I think that what has got to decide...
Mr. Baldwin, I still don't have clear whether you favor the black Muslim program or the NAACP program. Two different approaches.
But I will not answer it that way. I certainly don't favor the black Muslim movement. But I can see great limits.
See why it came about.
I can see very well why it came about.
I think Mr. Lincoln has explained in his book very well why it came about.
I don't think that he has.
I don't think there's any mystery.
Very well why it came about, or how it exists. For instance, in there where it was said in the book that I spent 2 hours in a secret conversation with Castro, that wasn't done on any research other than through a local New York paper, whom we are suing right now for $3 million for libel. for, we have a $3 million libel suit against a New York paper for saying that I spent 2 hours in a secret conference with Castro. Now, if that's an authentic statement and that's representative of the other statements in the book, then I can say that the book is representative of Muslims.
I must respond to that, Mr. X. It was from you yourself.
I think you're wrong.
I am not wrong on this case. It was from you yourself and not from reading in any New York paper that I found that you had had an appointment which you kept with Mr. Castro. These words are from your mouth.
No, wait a minute now. I'll clarify that. 2 of us, and I think aloud that there were 2, in a conversation with you, explained about this highly publicized incident with Castro. And we told you exactly how it came about, that I was representing the city of the mayor's office and the police department and half of the civic groups in Harlem that made it possible for me to go up there on the Castro.
That when we have only 7 minutes left.
I would like to say that
5 minutes left.
This particular sect or movement is just one of a succession of such movements that have been in American life for the last 3 centuries. Among Negroes, they began around about 1815 when the American colonization movement began to grow, and Negroes went to Sierra Leone, they went to Liberia, and since then these movements have been recurrent. On the eve of the Civil War, Major Martin R. Delaney had gone to the west coast of Africa and signed treaties with African chiefs, showing that he had a considerable following, and this thought has been in people's minds for a long time. It isn't anything new.
But Mr. Schuyler, I take it to be Mr. Baldwin's point and Mr. Lincoln's point in his book that there is a new situation in the world. Mr. Baldwin,
I don't think, I think that it is misleading to talk about even Garvey. Any of the movements the
movement of the 20s, yes, for the benefit.
Any of these movements, there's one great difference between them, if only one. The difference is Africa. You know, this makes a great deal of difference. But I really want to repeat this point. I think the only way to challenge this movement or to undercut it is for this country to do something it does not seem to be prepared to do, which is to become really overnight a radical country. When I say radical, I mean to really re-examine and overhaul the entire social fabric, to ask, everyone in this country should ask himself why it's so important to be white and what they will lose if they admit to themselves, that I personally, speaking only now for myself, you know, I cannot imagine anything this country can offer me that I any longer want. And what has happened to me, it seems to me, has happened to every Negro in this country. And the only way this can be redeemed and we can prevent, as I say, a repetition of this history with the roles reversed, is to decide right now that this country, either everyone in this country is free, either I'm a man or I am not. And it is up to the country to decide it. It is not really any longer up to me. It is
Lincoln, I don't think you agree with that from reading your book.
Well, I certainly agree with it in part. Whether it is the Black Muslim movement, or whether it's the NAACP, whether it's the sit-ins, or whether it's the Southern Christian Leadership Conference under Mr. King, one of the objectives is certainly identical to all of these various expressions, and that is the essential freedom and the dignification of the Negro. Now, whether he goes about it in the way of the Muslims or whether he goes about it in some other way, I believe that this has to come about in this country, and it has to come rather soon. This I do say in my book. This country cannot continue to exist black and white. Either we're going to have to be Americans or we're going to continue to be plagued with all kinds of organizations. If the black Muslims did not exist, then some other group would exist in that place to fill this vacuum.
Mr. Schuyler, I think you disagree even more sharply with Mr. Baldwin.
Well, I just simply think that there's a lot of wishful thinking in many of these statements. I see no statistical evidence of all this. I've been all over the country. I don't know if the mass of Negroes are panting to join the black Muslims, just like they weren't panting to join Garvey. But there are certain elements that will, because you have all kinds of people in any group. The Negro group is like any other group. You have everything in it. And there's never going to be any unity of all the Negroes, and I think it would be a catastrophe if there were.
Perhaps there will never,
Mr. Lincoln,
perhaps there will never be complete unanimity among Negroes. It would be most anomalous if this should come about. But there is, I think with Mr. Baldwin, a sharpening of the Negro mood, a kind of insistence that he must.
Pardon me, Mr. Lincoln. I want Mr. X to have a word here before we have to close. Just a word.
Yes, I don't think that all of the Muslims who follow Mr. Muhammad read the book, that is, the leaders, and we actually don't think that it rightly represents us. And Mr. Muhammad's aim is this. He was raised by God to separate the black man in America from the white man, because the white man will not give us freedom, justice, and equality on his own. And he also teaches us that if white America can't give the black man in America complete recognition as a human being immediately, right here, then we have to separate, and God will give it to us. And he also teaches us that all of the trouble that America is having, just like Pharaoh had trouble in the Bible because he mistreated the slaves, every trouble, political and otherwise.
I have the cutoff signal. I'm sorry. For this discussion, thank you, Mr.
Yes,
X, Mr. Eric Lincoln, Mr. James Baldwin, and Mr. George Schuyler.
Your host was Eric F. Goldman, professor of history at Princeton University. Professor Goldman's guests today were Professor C. Eric Lincoln, James Baldwin, Malcolm X, and George S. Schuyler.